So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Bioscience Roadmap virtual event. This is Tammy McLeod, President and CEO of the Flinn Foundation, and today I'll be serving as the MC of this program. For us at the Foundation, I'm sure for all of you, COVID-19 has affected our lives in many ways and has presented us with some daunting challenges. At the Flinn Foundation, we've been profoundly honored but not surprised by the response of those in our bioscience and healthcare communities. You've stepped up and worked together to address these challenges. Our researchers have focused intensely on developing COVID-19 diagnostic tests, vaccines, and therapeutics. Our entrepreneurs are pivoting their business models to manufacture ventilators and personal protective equipment. Doctors, nurses, medical staff are working tirelessly to take care of the sick. And educators, much as in my own home, have devised new ways to teach our students and so much more. We really believe that Arizona is primed to take on challenges in significant part because of the investments that we've made over the past 2 decades. Those investments of public funds been to improve our health, research, and educational systems, investments of private resources to build our industry base and entrepreneurial culture, and investments of time and that collaborative energy, just like you're making today. Since launching Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap nearly 20 years ago, Foundation has held annual events to report to the community on how that bioscience sector is performing. Today's event is the very first one we've ever done online, but the program is the same as we would have presented in person. First, you'll hear a data-rich report on the status of Arizona's bioscience sector by Mitch Horowitz, Principal and Managing Director of TEConomy Partners. Following that, you'll hear the findings of the new Milken Institute study on Arizona's Technology and Research Initiative Fund, or TRIF, as many of us know it. TRIF has propelled scientific research at our state universities for 20 years, and Kevin Klowden, who leads Milken's Center for Regional Economics, will make that presentation. Both Mitch and Kevin are online today, and they'll take your questions later in the program. And then finally, we have a video for you on the new bioscience reporting beat at the Arizona Republic. At these annual events, we usually hand out a brochure to all of you that summarizes the year in Arizona biosciences. And we have this again for you today, but it'll be digital. Look for a copy in your email tomorrow, and we'll put a link to the online version on the Flinn Foundation website as well. And I would also like to mention a new online tool on the Flinn website. It's the Arizona Biomap, a database of Arizona's bioscience ecosystem. We put that together with the input of many of you on the steering committee and in the community, and we've built a searchable online map of more than 1,000 organizations and companies in Arizona's bioscience sector, plus a curated resource bank for entrepreneurs, for researchers, job seekers, investors, and of course our elected officials. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Slater. Mark is the chair of Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap Steering Committee, and he's Vice President of Research at Honor Health and CEO of the Honor Health Research Institute. Mark?
Thank you, Tammy, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate you joining us virtually and taking a time in the middle of this crisis to come together and help us to continue our momentum in advancing the biosciences and in addressing this COVID crisis. Working for a major health system, I can attest to what Tammy is saying. These are unprecedented times. The demands that are placed on our health systems and our healthcare workers are at an all-time high. But I am so proud of and grateful for our frontline care providers who have shown great heroism, generosity, and courage in running toward this crisis rather than away. At the Honor Health Research Institute, we've been busy working to accelerate innovations to lessen the burden and to get ahead of this unprecedented crisis. We have repurposed our drug development expertise from cancer and other illnesses under leadership of physician scientists like Dr. Gordon and Dr. Sharma in collaboration with many, many others to advance diagnostics, both late stage and early intervention strategies, and vaccine developments, and to be able to apply new innovations in care, such as the ECMO response that Dr. Riley found in the first gravely ill COVID-19 survivor that was reported in the Arizona Republic today. These are ways that we're trying to make sure that Arizonans have access to new innovations and have all means of care and potential benefits available to them. They're not just reserved for some of the other regions that are more strongly hit at this point. I'd also like to recognize our Arizona healthcare leadership in providing the preparedness, safety, and care for our community, despite the unimaginable financial and operational burdens this crisis places on the healthcare system. The crisis we're undergoing underscores the importance of having a unified state plan that brings us together to plan not only for prosperity, but also for times of need. And we have a broad-based audience online today, including some who may be relatively new to the Arizona Biosciences Roadmap. So please allow me a bit of background to set the stage. The Biosciences Roadmap is Arizona's long-term strategic plan to develop a thriving biosciences sector. The end goal is to build Arizona as a globally competitive biosciences hub with the benefit to Arizonans of improved health outcomes, high-paying jobs for the next generation, and a stronger, more diversified economy. The roadmap was commissioned and launched by the Flinn Foundation in 2002, and dozens of institutions and hundreds of Arizona leaders have been working to implement its recommendations ever since. I have served on the steering committee that oversees roadmap implementation since my first week in Arizona in 2007, and have been privileged to chair since 2018. The steering committee features about 100 leaders across many sectors that comprise the biosciences. We have scientists, healthcare leaders, university administrators, entrepreneurs, industry representatives, investors, elected officials, and many more. The steering committee has been fertile ground for ideas and collaborative actions that have helped to give Arizona a national reputation, a national reputation for having the collaborative gene that is necessary for success in biosciences region. The Biosciences Roadmap is the longest running statewide biosciences strategic plan in the nation. And I'd like to underscore the word statewide. While Tammy and I are speaking to you from Phoenix metropolitan area, we have many with us today from Tucson, Flagstaff, and beyond. Southern and Northern Arizona have organized regional biosciences efforts through organizations like the Southern Arizona Leadership Council and the Economic Collaborative of Northern Arizona. The distinctive assets of these regions contribute greatly to our statewide approach. Thank you, and now let's go back to Tammy to introduce our first presentation.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciated that and learned something about you. I didn't know that you came to the Bioscience Roadmap Steering Committee during your first week in Arizona, so appreciated that. One of the tenets of the roadmap is accountability, and since the roadmap was launched in 2002, the Flinn Foundation has been commissioning studies to track performance and to report it back to you publicly. So Battelle compiled and assessed those metrics during the roadmap's first decade, and TEConomy Partners ever since. One person who's been involved in the entire continuum is Mitch Horowitz, TEConomy's principal and managing director. Mitch and his team just completed the 2020 assessment of the Arizona Bioscience performance, and he recorded his presentation for us, which we're going to play now. He is online, however, and will be available for questions later in the program.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the findings of how Arizona has performed in biosciences development over the past 2 years. To help monitor progress of the Arizona Biosciences Roadmap, TEConomy Partners was engaged to provide an independent assessment of progress every 2 years. And it should be noted that TEConomy principals were involved in the preparation of the 2002 Roadmap report while at Battelle. The roadmap has evolved over time. With support from the Flinn Foundation, an updated roadmap was developed in 2014 to build upon the accomplishments of the original 2002 roadmap. This 2014 update sets out a bold vision for Arizona in the biosciences. It recognizes the opportunity for Arizona to be globally competitive and a national leader in specific areas of the biosciences, such as precision medicine, diagnostics, bioengineering, and other areas of core competencies in the biosciences found in Arizona. But to succeed, the 2014 update really brings forward a renewed focus on establishing an ecosystem that offers a high-value environment for biosciences development to take place. And that includes ensuring access to talent, entrepreneurial businesses, and a high-functioning translational research capacity building upon the clinical excellence found across the state. Now let's turn to the 2020 performance review. Let me say at the outset, it's an outstanding report card, one that Arizona should take great pride in. Progress has been made across nearly every performance metric. Most notably, growth in both biosciences industry and university research has outpaced the nation. This success points to the importance of Arizona renewing both the Technology and Research Initiative Fund, or what is commonly referred to as TRIF, and the Angel Investment Tax Credit. The first set of performance measures we want to start with are the bottom line economic development measures of success found in jobs, wages, and regional growth. This requires us to step back and understand the diverse set of industries that comprise the biosciences for the Arizona Roadmap. We start with building upon the non-clinical bioscience industries as defined by the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, a group known as BIO, which TEConomy works with to track state-by-state bioscience development trends every 2 years. This set of non-clinical bioscience industries include a wide range of industry activities from services to manufacturing to distribution, and it also includes a range of markets from ag bio to medical devices to drugs and pharmaceuticals, as well as supportive research testing and medical labs that are critical to advancing and deploying biosciences innovations. But for Arizona, the definition of biosciences would not be complete without also considering its network of hospital systems, which are so integral in overall biosciences development in the state. It's through this network of hospital systems that clinical excellence is advanced that can generate ideas for innovations. Clinical trials activities can be undertaken to test new innovations, and broader research efforts are conducted, including nearly $32 million of NIH research funding in 2019. This definition of the biosciences in Arizona translates into 77% of the jobs in the biosciences being found in hospitals and 23% in non-hospital industries, of which biosciences distribution, research testing in medical labs, and medical devices are the largest segments. Turning to the long-term employment trends in biosciences employment, it's quite notable that biosciences employment growth in Arizona has been leading the U.S. year after year since the start of the roadmap effort dating back to 2002. For the overall period of 2002 to 2018, while the U.S. grew by 20%, as shown in the graphic here, Arizona grew by 70%, quite a big difference. And in the last 2 years, the U.S. grew 3.6% in biosciences, while Arizona far outstripped it by growing by 8.3%, so more than 2 times the growth found nationally. Even in the context of Arizona's generally high-growth economy, biosciences job growth really stands out. This graphic here compares biosciences job growth to total private sector industry growth in Arizona. Since 2002, Arizona private sector industries have grown by 30%. Again, this falls far short of the 70% that biosciences has grown. While in the early years of the roadmap, what the graphic is showing is that biosciences and total private sector industry growth generally track together. But then in 2007, the biosciences really took off, in part because it didn't have a problem in the recession and it just continued to outpace overall private sector growth even in the economic recovery years. So in the last 2 years, while Arizona's private sector industries have grown overall by 6.2%, the biosciences have now grown by 8.3%. So a 2 percentage point advantage for the biosciences industry sector compared to all industries in Arizona. The sustained growth of biosciences jobs in Arizona is quite remarkable. This chart here is showing how employment breaks out across each stage of the business cycle since 2002. And what you can see here is that in terms of total biosciences, Arizona has not only outgrown U.S. biosciences growth at every stage of the business cycle going back to 2002, but it's also outgrown total private sector industry growth in Arizona at every stage of the business cycle. And if you look at the bottom row here in terms of non-hospital biosciences, Arizona's performance is really outstanding. Even in the recession years of 2007 to 2009, Arizona's non-hospital bioscience industries grew by 6%, even as the nation declined by 1%. And in the most recent economic expansion since 2009 through 2018, the growth has just been phenomenal, nearly 49% in Arizona in non-hospital biosciences compared to just 18% for the country. And in the most recent 2-year period in that non-hospital biosciences growth, it's been 15% growth in Arizona compared to 7.2%. But just stepping back for a moment in terms of the current economic uncertainties, I think what particularly the recession years are showing for Arizona is the great resiliency that this industry has to sustain growth. And that could be quite encouraging and a really important buffer for economic uncertain times ahead of us. Another way to consider the success of Arizona since the beginning of the roadmap effort back in 2002 is the gains that Arizona has been making in its share of national biosciences employment. These gains in the national share indicate the growing competitiveness of Arizona in bioscience industry development. A close look at this chart reveals that between 2002 and 2018, every industry subsector of the biosciences industry in Arizona is increasing its share of total U.S. jobs. Notable are the large gains in the share of national employment in drugs and pharmaceuticals, as well as medical devices in Arizona. These are two key manufacturing industries in biosciences that generate very high economic multipliers and so can have really significant impacts across the economy in Arizona. Arizona is now closing in on the national average in total biosciences employment concentration, or what economists call location quotient, as measured in that last column. And that's a measure of specialization of an industry in a particular state. And among the subsectors that Arizona is close to reaching that U.S. average, where you would have a measure of 1. So if you see total biosciences, Arizona is now at 0.93, and in distribution 0.95, in medical devices 0.94, and in hospitals nearly equal to the U.S. at 0.97. What that's suggesting is that Arizona is reaching a very significant milestone of raising itself so that it's equal to the U.S. And then we could see if the sustained growth of Arizona that's been realized since 2002, very soon Arizona will actually exceed the U.S. in its level of industry concentration and become specialized in the biosciences. This strong job growth found in the biosciences is also being replicated in terms of strong growth of wages in the biosciences in Arizona compared to the nation in biosciences, as well as compared to the statewide average growth of all private sector industries. And you can see this by the chart on the right, where you can see the percentage changes each year, and very strong growth in Arizona in wages. But what really stands out about the wages and the bottom line of why the biosciences development matters is the high quality of jobs it generates and the high wages for Arizona in the biosciences compared to the total private sector. And keep in mind that these are not just jobs for doctors and Ph.D.s, but nurses, manufacturing workers, lab technicians, and distribution and logistic workers. So quite a broad spectrum of skills that are found in the life sciences. Biosciences is also a leading industry driver across the regions of Arizona, as shown here in the chart. And what's interesting is that the mix of industries really does vary across the regions, though the one in common really is that hospitals, which are a key foundation in each region. Now let's go ahead and take a closer look at each region. In Flagstaff, the biosciences industry is highly specialized in two key subsectors: medical devices led by Gore and hospitals. This makes biosciences industry development a very important regional industry driver overall for the Flagstaff region. In Phoenix, we see a more varied base of biosciences activities taking place than in Flagstaff. And the one sector that really stands out is bioscience-related distribution, where already the Phoenix region stands 10% above the national average in terms of its location quotient, that measure of specialization. But we also want to point out that in addition to really strong growth in research testing and medical labs over the years, as well as in the hospital base that exists in Phoenix, what we're seeing in drugs and pharmaceuticals is really extraordinary growth. And this growth of nearly 240% since 2002 is continuing in recent years. So it grew by another 1,000 jobs from 2000 to over 3,000 in just the most recent period. And that actually is most of the growth across the state in drugs and pharmaceuticals. So we really see something special happening here for Phoenix and something to watch in the years to come. In Tucson, meanwhile, we see a real level of specialization of 1.36 or 36% above the national employment concentration in the hospital sector. And that reflects the mix of hospitals in the region, including the state's leading academic medical center. Other key industries of research testing and medical labs, as well as medical devices, have had healthy growth over the years dating back to 2002. But to have the bottom line success in economic development measures of jobs, wages, and regional growth in the biosciences really requires having a high-functioning innovation ecosystem. More than other advanced industries, the biosciences really depends upon basic research discoveries that are then commercialized into new products in terms of therapeutics and drugs and medical devices. And often this takes place through new startup firms, but even existing firms really do devote a lot more to R&D than other industries. So let's now take a look at how that innovation ecosystem across research, commercialization, and new venture development is doing in Arizona. First, in overall academic biosciences research trends over the years dating back to 2002, which this graphic is showing, what you can see is a little unevenness. In the early period from 2002 to about 2008, 2009, Arizona kind of grew with the country in terms of bioscience academic R&D. But then there was a slowdown between 2009 and 2015. And now what we're seeing since 2015 is a really nice rebound to the point where Arizona has caught back up to the overall growth of bioscience academic R&D dating back over the period of 2002 to 2018. A closer look at biosciences R&D across Arizona's universities finds that each of them have been making really strong gains, particularly in the past 2 years from 2016 to 2018, well outpacing the country. So this is something that's broadly shared across the universities and something that is really notable. And this strong academic research growth in the biosciences is being mirrored in the gold standard of bioscience research funding, the highly competitive funding that comes from the National Institutes of Health. After falling behind the growth trends, as seen in this graphic, Arizona in recent years starting from 2015 has really begun to outpace the national growth. And so over the entire period now, from 2002 through 2019, we're able to get a little bit more current data here. What you're seeing is Arizona is actually now outstripping the U.S. growth over that entire period. So what this translates in terms of overall NIH support is that in 2019, Arizona has now realized its highest levels in its share of National Institutes of Health NIH funding recorded since the roadmap began in 2002. And this high share is found both in awards as well as in funding. So quite an outstanding performance. And it's always important to note for Arizona that, and to keep in mind that while the universities really do generate the lion's share of NIH funding, Arizona's hospitals and companies are also important recipients. And for the companies, this often involves small business innovation research awards from NIH that are really critical sources for commercialization funding of new treatments and technologies. A particularly important driver of commercialization for the biosciences, given the importance of university research discoveries in innovation, is the activities of university technology transfer. Arizona in the 2018 to 2019 period continues to generate significant levels of technology transfer activities in the biosciences. And this includes 129 licenses executed, as well as 32 new bioscience startups from university intellectual property. But stepping back over all the measures, the picture is a bit more mixed. While patents are up and licenses and startups are holding up against prior levels, disclosures are slightly down, and licensing income has fallen more significantly. I don't want us, though, to make too much of a point of this licensing income because it's not a perfect measure of success. Many times, the biggest wins in licensing income come from startups that take years to be realized. And so often, instead of going for quick income, by going and focusing on startups, university technology transfer is sacrificing short-term gains. And that's nothing overall from these measures to keep us up at night. But again, it's something compared to a really outstanding report card across all the other metrics that it just deserves some attention, and potentially there are ways to provide more resources to continue to advance technology transfer. But this is definitely an area in this report card that is more mixed. Now turning to venture capital, which is important because it enables innovations in the biosciences to be commercialized as products to help patients and to help startup firms really scale up and generate jobs. In recent years, this has been an area of concern for Arizona, but I'm really pleased to report that 2019 was a banner year where the level of venture capital investments reached new highs of nearly $200 million for the year. And this was not just one event that took place, but this is spread across a lot of firms in the state. So this is a very positive sign, but again, it's 1 year, so it needs to be closely monitored in the years to follow. The strong gains in venture capital in 2019 now puts Arizona ahead of some key peer states such as Texas and Florida in its share of venture capital funding relative to NIH funding. So kind of a way to normalize and be able to compare how effective venture capital is relative to the research base. Again, a key goal to keep in mind is really reaching that U.S. average, and there's a little ways to go, but 2019 really has put Arizona back on the map in this. It's also important to recognize that venture capital is very much concentrated, and so it's a difficult measure to really succeed in relative to the two large states of Massachusetts and California that tend to dominate in this area. What is encouraging for Arizona is that it is standing out compared to the nation in its share of deals at the earliest stages of new venture development, pre-seed and angel investment. And most impressively, the share of angel investment deals is more than double the U.S. average and shows the importance of replenishing the state's angel investment tax credit that took place in 2017. Finally, the mix of biosciences technologies being funded through venture capital in Arizona compared to the country really provides a window into future growth opportunities. Venture capital investments really stand out in biosciences, IT, and medical devices in Arizona, well exceeding the national share of venture capital investments in the biosciences. And biosciences IT is especially interesting for Arizona since it increasingly is connected to healthcare innovations around the use of health analytics and promoting population health management. So it really is an area where the strength of Arizona's hospital systems can offer a platform for identifying innovation needs as well as first customers. Both the medical device as well as the bio IT sectors offers another advantage for Arizona because it's a pathway to generating and scaling up new companies that requires fewer dollars than biotechnology or pharmaceuticals. So bringing together now all of the metrics, we can now see the strong report card earned by Arizona in the biosciences development. In terms of measures of economic development performance of jobs and wages, what we're seeing is just outstanding performance, where Arizona has truly outpaced the country and growing in very broad ways. And that's something that really reflects the long-term commitment that's been taking place, and so is something to tout to others in the economic development community. At the same time, in the innovation ecosystem metrics of success, we again are showing really good performance. The university's R&D efforts have really turned around, and we're seeing broad growth across the universities in biosciences R&D. NIH funding is on a very strong growth trajectory. We had a great year in venture capital in 2019 for Arizona. And while not a blemish by any means, mixed performance in the bio university technology transfer activities. And so again, something to keep track of, but nothing to be worried about. And ultimately, what we're seeing for Arizona is real success in its biosciences development. With that, I am open for questions and really appreciate the opportunity. Something it's always special to be able to deliver such great news about growth in a key sector that people have been working a long time to advance, and all that long-term effort looks like it's paying off.
Thank you so much, Mitch. If anyone has a question about Mitch's presentation, please submit it through the Q&A tool, which you should find on the right-hand side of your screen. And as I mentioned earlier, Mitch is going to be joining us for the Q&A segment after the next presentation. But now it is my pleasure to introduce the next presentation, which is Kevin Klowden, the Executive Director of the Milken Institute for Regional Economics and California Center. One of the recommendations of the roadmap is to study the impact of Arizona's Technology and Research Initiative Fund, or TRIF. And TRIF was first approved by Arizona voters in 2000 as a small but incredibly important part of Proposition 301, education sales tax. As many of you know, it supports scientific research in the biosciences and other areas, as well as workforce development and technology transfer. And it's been integral to the success of Arizona's university research engines and the bioscience sector. With the support of the university presidents and the Board of Regents, this year the Flinn Foundation commissioned a study looking at TRIF. We chose the Milken Institute because of their given expertise in scientific and innovation-based economies, both globally and at the regional levels. And the results of the study are available today on both the Milken and the Flinn websites. And as with Mitch, we asked Kevin to record a presentation of the study findings in advance, but after his presentation, he'll join Mitch to take your questions. So remember, please feel free to submit those using the Q&A tool at any time. So, Kevin?
This is a presentation on the Milken Institute's study examining Arizona's Technology and Research Initiative Fund that was commissioned by the Flinn Foundation. The Milken Institute, for those of you who are not aware, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit economic think tank based in California with a focus on job creation, access to capital, and health. We have offices not only in California, but in Washington, D.C., in Singapore, New York, and London. The focus of this specific report was to examine the overall role of the Technology and Research Initiative Fund, TRIF, and the broader impact of TRIF on the development of an innovation economy over the years of its existence in Arizona, and its ongoing broader impacts, even to this day, on issues ranging from startups, capital access, workforce issues, and broader research in the research environment being conducted not only within the Arizona economy as a whole, but directly in connection to Arizona's three premier public research universities, the University of Arizona, Arizona State University, and Northern Arizona University, and impacts that spread throughout the entire state. As global competition has increased, it's incredibly important to understand that Arizona's inherent advantages in terms of being a low-cost, low-regulation state have placed it in a competitive business standpoint, but it has also meant that the need for relationships, particularly strong ones, between academic and industry researchers, between universities involved in technology research, technology transfer, and the private sector is incredibly important, because Arizona is not only facing competition from within the United States, but increasingly from overseas. TRIF has had significant impacts in Arizona's research spending, its overall impact, both in terms of GDP and employment. From 2013 to 2018, Arizona has seen high-tech employment rise by an impressive 15%, and high-tech GDP rise by an even more remarkable 27%. That's a huge, significant amount of activity and growth. That's, in fact, been even surpassed by the TRIF impact of its funding on return on investment that the Arizona University system has seen from 2012 to 2019, from $232 million to $433 million. This has also been mirrored by a tremendous growth in patents issued, in startups formed, and broader overall impacts that can be seen in employment and throughout the private sector. Proposition 301 was passed by Arizona voters in November of 2000. It established, among other things, the state's Technology and Research Initiative Fund, TRIF, which we are profiling as part of this research. TRIF was set aside 12% of the money from the sales tax increase that was meant to fund university research and tech transfer operations. However, TRIF is not alone in creating and funding the broader innovation ecosystem in the state. The money that was set aside both for community college workforce development programs at 3% and the vast majority of funds, 85%, which was set aside for K-12 funding, are all important to create the broader ecosystem, not only of tech transfer, but the education and development of the students who are essential to this broader ecosystem. Since TRIF was established in 2001 as a result of the 2000 Prop 301 vote, it's provided over $1.12 billion to develop projects in certain Arizona Board of Regents approved policy areas. The Arizona Board of Regents has to continuously appropriate and examine the various monies that are received through TRIF and to make sure that the initiatives involved support health, national security, water, environmental, energy solutions, space exploration, and optical solutions. In other words, key areas that Arizona has a comparative advantage and is being utilized to further build and strengthen the Arizona ecosystem. The Milken Institute issues its Best Performing Cities Index every year to measure not only job growth and wage growth in metropolitan areas around the United States, but also an examination of growth in high-tech economic activity in those metros. In particular, the Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale metro has been a strong performer, going from a relatively low 136th place in 2011 all the way up to 20th place in the year 2018, the most recent year for which an index was issued at the time of this report. In looking at a variety of states in the report to compare Arizona to, we specifically looked at states that Arizona would be positioned to compete against, both in terms of geography and in terms of comparable resources and research universities in attracting both high-tech and life science research and talent. In spite of being placed against some fairly fierce competition, Arizona did quite well. Arizona's GDP growth in high-tech and life sciences actually outstripped on a percentage basis most of the other states involved, only falling behind California, which received a huge amount of international investment, Nevada, which was growing from a relatively low level and in many ways benefiting from an overflow from California, and Utah, which in many ways reflects sort of the model that Arizona is competing against, a state that has especially pushed hard to attract money, research, and overall investment and innovation into the state. Over the next few slides, we look at specific data that was collected over the lifespan of TRIF since its establishment in 2001 by Arizona State University and the University of Arizona. Because this data was not collected for this entire time period by Northern Arizona University, it is not shown on these graphs, even though TRIF had a clear and demonstrable impact at NAU as well. Our first slide looks at the growth of startups formed, which has been a fairly consistent upward trend at both universities since the establishment of TRIF back in 2001. Startups are an incredibly important metric because the fact that they show new activity in terms of small businesses that are able to grow and thrive and to see the clear results of tech transfer going from the universities to the private sector. The growth in the number of patents issued is another significant metric in showing overall levels of research activity at the public universities in Arizona and how they have resulted in clear, demonstrable contributions in intellectual property. As you can see in this chart, the overall level of activity stayed relatively constant in terms of patents issued until taking off around 2011, where each of the universities has been outperforming peers around the country and significantly increasing the number of patents issued to each of them. The growth of research expenditures at the two larger public universities is also another metric of the impact and return of TRIF funding. The growth of these research expenditures has been generally on an upward slope throughout the existence of TRIF, even during periods of economic downturns, and their overall ability to contribute to the state economy even during these downturns is important, as having a broader exposure to high-tech, knowledge-based activity is extremely important in giving Arizona a more robust economy. As ASU has established itself and built new facilities, it has increasingly been able to grow in activity and to start to match the University of Arizona as a nationally recognized premier research university. The growth of research expenditures at the two larger public universities in Arizona is incredibly important. Not only has this growth managed to be relatively recession-proof, but it has also continued to slope upwards with minor interruptions throughout the existence of TRIF, and has very much played a part in Arizona State becoming a premier national research university in a way that the University of Arizona already was, giving the state two strong research universities at a national level and allowing the state to be more robust in its overall innovation economy. The issuance of licenses based on technology transfer from the universities is incredibly important as a measure of being able to show economic activity translating from research to the private sector within Arizona. The revenue generated by these licenses is important for continuing to support ongoing research at the universities, but just as importantly, it creates a robust partnership between the public and private sector, which is essential for the innovation economy in the state. The return on investment from TRIF expenditures is a wonderful way of examining the broader economic impact that results from money put into tech transfer and research at the three state universities. As money is allocated through TRIF and dispersed to the states, it results not only in direct expenditures on research, but also further indirect activity through partnerships with the private sector, employment, job and economic growth, and the creation of a broader result in the ecosystem through the state universities that dramatically outstrips the expenditures from TRIF itself. One of the most important areas of economic activity that has been facilitated by TRIF funds is tech transfer activity in the biosciences. In the most recent year available in 2018, we analyzed the data for all three state universities in terms of R&D funding, innovation disclosures, patent applications filed and issued, licenses and options executed, and license income received, as well as startups. As you can see, there is a significant amount of activity at all three universities. And the results, particularly in life sciences, are important because this is one of the most important growing areas of economic activity in the country, not just in Arizona. In comparing Arizona to some neighboring states and states with similar overall economic and population sizes in their tech and science workforce, one of the things that was important to understand is to what extent Arizona has benefited from having a relatively strong workforce and how much that is tied to its innovation economy. Arizona's ranking of 14th on a per capita basis in the Milken Institute State Technology and Science Index allows it to outpace all of the peer states listed here, with the exception of Colorado and Utah, which are viewed as two of the strongest tech and science states in the country. This means that Arizona is better positioned to take advantage of TRIF funding, but also that its overall workforce in terms of job creation and the strength of the individuals involved has benefited from the money from TRIF to overall maintain and grow that innovation workforce. Another excellent metric that shows how TRIF has benefited Arizona in comparison to peer states has been how it has contributed to higher education's R&D expenditure growth over the period of 2009 to 2018. When looking at the external metric from the National Science Foundation, we can see that Arizona has consistently performed as well as or better than all of its peer states that it's being compared to in terms of overall growth. Having this growth in R&D expenditures is incredibly important, not just for the universities, but as we have shown, for its overall impact and level of commitment for the private sector, which benefits tremendously in Arizona from this collaboration and the tech transfer, patents issues, and license issues that result. As part of our overall analysis that we did of the TRIF program and its impact throughout the state, we spent time talking to stakeholders, not only at the universities, but in the private sector, and determining the overall value and worth of the various programs connected to TRIF to the Arizona economy, not just at the universities, but just as significantly more broadly in the private sector through technology transfer, impacts on the workforce, impacts on economic activity. Our report included case studies looking at some of the specific programs that benefited from TRIF in different parts of the state, and our discussions illuminated how TRIF not only provided a significant amount of activity at the universities in their metro areas, but more broadly through partnerships and activity in a variety of different counties and locations in Arizona. As a result of our analysis, we had three core recommendations that we wanted to convey to you today. The first is the inherent importance of continuing to maintain the current structure and funding levels of the TRIF program under Proposition 301 in order to ensure ongoing support for innovation at the Arizona public universities and in particular their partnerships with the private sector. The second recommendation, furthering efforts in technology transfer at the public universities and continuing to facilitate the establishment and growth of startups based off of this technology is just as important and significant. Third, prioritizing ongoing efforts at the universities in conjunction with the private sector to educate and create opportunities for workers from within Arizona and the life sciences and other scientific research prioritized by TRIF so that the creation of and local hiring of and for high-paying knowledge-based jobs will continue to occur in Arizona and ensure that the state is not only competitive against other parts of the United States, but against international competition and to allow the Arizona economy to continue and grow and thrive. We consider these recommendations to be essential as part of our overall analysis, and I want to thank you very much for participating in this presentation today.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate your presentation. And now we're going to move on to Q&A. Before I begin, let me just say that a number of you have asked. The slides will be available, and we will make them available to anyone who would like them. And so we'll move along here. Really appreciate everyone's engagement and the fact that we've been getting questions steadily through these presentations. So I'll start off with a question for Mitch. And Mitch, this question is on the translational spectrum, what percentage of patents and licenses actually make it into clinical practice?
Thank you, Tammy. That kind of metric is a highly uncertain one, and I think that we all understand how rigorous the system is in terms of bringing innovations into the life sciences. So it's hard to give a precise number on that one, but what is critical to know is that the industry that's been built up includes activities around clinical trials, and that's a very important driver, and we measure that for pharma across states, and that drives a lot of economic activity. But to be able to be precise about that kind of metric is really difficult because it really depends upon a lot of factors about efficacy, about comparative strengths, about how health insurance markets work. And so there just isn't a really good metric on that. But without going through the translational system, you would have no activity. So it's through this very arduous, rigorous system, as we're going to learn as we bring new therapeutics forward, both for treatment as well as vaccines for prevention on COVID-19. It has to be that way, and so it's a difficult question to put a specific metric on.
Gotcha. Thanks very much. Mitch, you showed a couple of slides that were comparing us, in many cases, to nearby Western states. But how do biojobs here compare to states like Massachusetts?
So, we're right in the midst of pulling together our report for bio that I think is kind of be coming out this June. And so we don't have the precise numbers. But what I will say, whether it's Massachusetts or California, those are clearly two standout states, but they don't always perform well. And so, there was a period, we actually did some work for the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center when it was going for its renewal of funding, which it achieved, and showed that, in fact, those large states don't always perform well. And it requires, in the case of Massachusetts, to have had that kind of major investment and on a proven winner, and doubling down on that really made a difference. And California, I could tell you, did have a pause and fell behind the U.S. for a while, and then rigorously came back in recent years. So I think for everyone, stay tuned, and I think in June of 2020 we'll be issuing our bio report. But we can tell you for sure there are going to be few states that have outperformed Arizona, just given how much greater than the overall national trends. How much Arizona has exceeded the national trends, even in this just 2-year period, and certainly since 2002, I'm not sure there are many states that can rival the growth.
Tammy, could I
And
chime
Kevin,
in on
is that? Yeah, please. That's where I was going.
Sure. So I would absolutely agree with Mitch that Arizona has been outperforming, at the very least on a relative basis. One of the real advantages Arizona's had, you can see that in the rising concentration of bioscience jobs in the state, is that it's a state, unlike a lot of others who actively invested in and chose to become a stronger center of bioscience and life science activity, who succeeded. A number of states who've made some efforts in this regard have had a real trouble actually creating jobs within the state. One of the key things that's really important about Arizona, and this is one of the reasons we not only profiled TRIF, but obviously, Mitch, looking at the broader bioscience ecosystem, is that Arizona is a lower cost state with universities who have actively been investing in the ecosystem, which means that it's able to attract a number of jobs who might be driven out bluntly by California or Massachusetts because of the higher cost of operating, and also attracted to some degree from states who might not have a strong and up and down ecosystem, who
have done some flirtations with the life sciences, but not nearly been as effective. And that's actually been reflected in the data, and it's one of the reasons that Arizona has been growing faster than the national average.
Absolutely, but low cost alone wouldn't do it if, and
Yep.
I think you probably agree, Kevin, with this, if we didn't also see the high value rising here. And I think, the broader view that you've presented about how university R&D has moved forward in the state is very impressive. And it's having that high value together with a lower cost of doing business that is just a great combination.
Otherwise, you would have seen states like Nevada or Oklahoma or Arkansas or even Missouri or Kansas, where they've been very much pushing the low cost of doing business, but they do not have the commitment to the university research and the partnership between the universities and the private sector.
Great. Let's move on to another question here. This is a question specifically regarding medical device growth opportunities and saying, it says that we should be cautious when we're talking, saying that fewer dollars are required for those opportunities. Our state's outperforming the U.S., and so how do we stay on track for that through 2020 to 25 and beyond?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything is relative, and it's not saying that moving particularly really innovative medical devices forward, you can do it on the cheap. What it's saying is it doesn't have the same level of funding that, for instance, taking a therapeutic to market would typically have. But what we're seeing in the medical device world is a lot of growth, but a lot of that growth is also because it's becoming even more scientifically complex in the kinds of linkage between bio advances and things like growth factors and bringing in nanotechnology and other very, very sophisticated technologies together with the more traditional ways that we tend to think about medical devices themselves. But to move forward, here's another interesting parallel about the importance of translational efforts and the roles that having a really strong hospital system can provide, because you really need thought leaders in medical devices, and there are ways to help get clinical insights about what's going to matter and what would be more effective. And that kind of partnership, and there's a great program nationally and has had a lot of impact at the university level called the Coulter centers that got created. And what they proved is that you could put together engineers and clinicians and really advance innovations going forward. And I think it's that kind of culture that needs to continue to be bred. And that's the way that your leadership in medical devices moves forward, and people recognizing that you bring that kind of thought leadership and have the capacities in the more physical and biological sciences and know how to bring them together. So you can't just assume that you're going to have continued medical device growth. It is very much a part of the translational research paradigm, along with drugs and therapeutics. And I think we all have a heightened sense of the importance of diagnostics, which of course has been a big cornerstone for Arizona as well.
Terrific, thanks. I'm going to put up one more question here, and then we are going to have to move on. If you did submit a question that we haven't gotten to yet, apologize for that and promise that we will get you an answer to your question when we send them out. So this question is, growth in IP generation patents is impressive, but we mentioned earlier that tech transfer is lagging. Kevin, I think this tied to your presentation, but how do we bridge that gap?
Well, there are a couple important things that have to happen. The first is that patents are an intellectual process in terms of research. There is a skill and ability in being able to turn and translate research into patents, but turning it into actual executable licenses is a mix of a couple things. And the first I just want to be really honest about for everybody is luck. Some of the most successful licenses that have hit have been ones that have turned out to have had applications well beyond what was originally expected. A number of the various drugs over the years that have been effective in arthritis and have been effective in broader medical applications were cases where additional research determined further applications in many cases that were well beyond what people originally thought. The most notorious of which often is Rogaine, which nobody expected to help with hair growth. But more directly in terms of actual process, a lot of that has to come down to having and attracting professors who are effective at having the ability to cooperate with the private sector to be able to work on taking patents and share them and work with companies, startups especially, who can capitalize on these various ideas and turn them into application. It requires funding, having an effective and robust venture capital ecosystem up and down. So not only in terms of growing licenses once they've been translated into the private sector, but also being able to get initial angel funding and then growth funding to be able to grow various licenses, especially when you're dealing with the life sciences, where a lot of drug trials are very expensive and require funding at different levels and different stages. And it requires patience because the growth, particularly in translating IP into results in the private sector, not only because of the trials, but because of the lengthy approval process for both drugs and therapeutics and for medical devices, is one where you can have a tremendous effort in terms of increased capitalization, recruitment of new professors, great ideas, and it can still take multiple years before you see those results.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what Kevin pointed out is, it takes more than just the universities to really have success, but I think almost every university tech transfer has learned that without having sources of proof of concept funding, the ability to validate and move from the bench to the bedside, you can really limit yourself. And many of the best research discoveries just aren't ready for commercialization, and there still needs to be quite a bit of investment to move them forward. And you need to do that with the best market intelligence that you can get, market assessments, but you also need some really, really early stage money that's well before even the angel investor dollars will come in.
All right. Thank you, Mitch and Kevin. We need to move along now. And another important recommendation of the Bioscience Roadmap is to develop an informed citizenry that understands the role and the importance of biosciences, much as we've all seen today. But to do this, the Flinn Foundation awarded a grant last year to the Arizona Republic to support a multimedia journalism initiative. And that initiative was to deepen public understanding of bioscience research, of the industry development, and of the clinical advances. Some of you may have seen the excellent reporting by Amanda Morris and Alex Lee on COVID-19 and some of the other bioscience topics. But this is one of the outcomes of our grant. So Greg Burton, executive editor, and his team have compiled a brief video to tell you more about what's become an incredibly important project serving the public interest.
Hi, I'm Greg Burton, executive editor of the Arizona Republic. About 2 years ago, Tammy McLeod approached me with an idea to highlight the innovations and innovators in the biosciences who are bringing new technology and new hope to Arizona. No one could have imagined then how important it would be today to have more journalists on the ground and in the laboratories reporting on the community spread of coronavirus and efforts to ramp up research on a vaccine to stop the disease. Thanks to the Flinn Foundation, we were able to hire 2 reporters, Amanda Morris and Alex Lee. They were in our newsroom when the first case of COVID-19 was diagnosed. Working with editors Diana Payan and Sean McKinnon, The Republic's bioscience team is helping every Arizonan understand the high-stakes race to combat this pandemic. That's why partnerships like this are so important, both for our state and the state of journalism. We're excited to share with you just some of this important work. So come along, take a look with me.
The West Nile virus has infected well over 100 people in Arizona this year.
Huanglongbing is the Chinese word for it, which means yellow dragon disease. It's a bacterial disease which affects all citrus.
I told them at that point, use me however you need to. Let's find a cure for this.
Anything that we can do to get the science and research across in a way that's understandable.
I find viruses fascinating. And as we were studying them, we accidentally stumbled upon the fact that the virus was also a killer of human and mouse cancer cells.
And so my whole job is to really make science accessible and approachable for people.
Well, I always say complicated stories needs complicated tools to tell. In these circumstances, bioscience concepts are very complicated and it's not everybody are familiar with it. So it's really important to bring another dimension to it so we can visualize it for our readers, so it's easier for them to understand what we're talking about and to convey what we want to convey to them.
This is critical because if we're going to be able to separate those with the infection from those that don't have the infection, we need to know who's infected.
Essentially, what happens is when the virus gets into the airway, it attacks the cells that line the surface of the lungs.
So we started reporting on this back in January, and I'm really grateful that we have this bioscience position right now because it's more important than ever.
What we have are robots that do all of this for us because, I don't think, given the burden that's coming, samples one at a time is going to get us there. We need to be thinking big and we need to be thinking bold.
My job is to produce 3D animations to help visualize some certain parts of the stories. For example, I'm working on a 3D model of a lung that being infected by the coronavirus, so people can rotate and then to see how severe this virus can be.
So the stories that I'm covering right now with this pandemic cover vaccine potentials and treatment potentials, and it also covers how testing works. And these are things the public needs to know in order to figure out how to stay safe and also to figure out what sort of treatments and vaccines might become available and how to separate the facts from the hypothesis of science.
It's scary because I have to look at my Proteus kids and recommend them going on a drug that at the end of the day, you think it's safe, it seems safe, there's not really any side effects, but there's just a lot more testing to be done. It's just life as a guinea pig.
Bioscience itself, that literally changes the world we live in. It modifies the environment, it modifies our bodies through treatment.
And I think it's really important because it's about every one of us as human beings.
Thank you again. This was just a small part of what we can do together, and I hope you see the potential for the future of partnerships like this.
All of the work you just saw would not have been possible without this generous grant. And I'm really grateful that we're able to cover these underreported important stories in an in-depth way.
So I feel really grateful that Flinn Foundation funded the position of XR developer and 3D artist, which shows your foresight and vision. And it's a great chance to showcase how VR, AR, and 3D storytelling can better help visualize and democratize bioscience to the general public.
Hello, this is Mark Slater, a chair of the Biosciences Roadmap Steering Committee again. And I'd like to thank the Arizona Republic for that wonderful presentation. It's outstanding to see our statewide newspaper taking an interest in providing in-depth coverage in the biosciences in such a new and exciting way. I would also like to thank Mitch Horowitz and Kevin Klowden for their inspiring presentations and for answering your questions on the state and development of the biosciences. As you've seen, Arizona's biosciences sector is reaching new heights, as Mitch outlined in his presentation, and it's clear that the ongoing investments in research through TRIF have played a vital role in laying the groundwork for this success. We now face a challenging road ahead in grappling with the impact of COVID-19. But remember, that's what this roadmap was built to do, to improve the health outcomes of Arizonans and to strengthen and diversify our economy to weather economic downturn. And that's exactly what happened during the Great Recession, when the bioscience and healthcare jobs continued to grow. We owe much gratitude to our steering committee members and our community partners for these successes over the past few years. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you as we move ahead. A recording of today's event will be posted on the Flinn website with the TEConomy and Milken reports and the Flinn Foundation progress report. I'd like to give a special thank you to Tammy, the Flinn staff, and Flinn board for their tremendous generosity, leadership, and ongoing commitment to Arizona, and in particular to the biosciences, in making Arizona the special place that we all know for us to thrive and to invest in. And I'd like to thank you, each of you, for participating in our virtual meeting. Please stay safe and healthy during these challenging times, and we look forward to engaging with you in person again further down the road. With that, we conclude this virtual meeting.